Greetings, everyone. We will go ahead and get started on time. My name is Dr. Erica Buchanan Rivera, and I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion here within Washington Township. Welcome to our Parent Caregiver Education Series through Washington Township's District Equity Leadership Team. We are excited to have you join us this evening. The purpose of this series is to explore topics of educational equity, which is the concept of giving students what they need to thrive and be successful within our educational spaces and environments. It involves creating an identity affirming space for students, as well as actively removing the barriers that may prohibit success. And so we want to create a shared community space to educate our families on educational issues that relate to equity. And tonight, we're going to focus on high ability needs. We have guest presenter Karen Brown with us this evening. I want to acknowledge that this event will be recorded. There are many complexities when it comes to navigating schedules, and our guest presenter is also in a different time zone right now, as I will explain as I produce her introduction. Therefore, I offer my sincerest apology for those who are unable to attend due to the scheduled date, and we'll make sure that this is accessible for everyone and viewed within our website. And for families who are honoring Yom Kippur, I wish you a beautiful as well as a meaningful fast. Karen Brown is a director of Gifted and Accelerated Learning in Scottsdale Unified School District. Karen teaches Gifted Education Master's Program courses at the University of Arizona, or Arizona State University, and consults throughout the country. She was the recipient of the 2018 National Association for Gifted Children Specialists and Masters Award and co-recipient of the 2013 NAGC Professional Network Award and the 2013 AAGT Gifted Teacher of the Year. She has co-authored 2 books, Differentiated Lessons for Every Learner and A Teacher's Guide to Flexible Grouping and Collaborative Learning, winner of the 2019 NAGC Book of the Year Award. We are so excited as well as honored to have Karen Brown join us this evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I want to give you just a little bit of information about myself to start with so that you can understand where I'm coming from. You've heard about where I'm coming from an educational standpoint, but I come to high ability learners as a mom. I have 5 children. 3 of my children are identified as high ability learners. And my youngest son is quite exceptional. And in fact, we laugh in our family that if he had been born first, we might not have had another child because he was a real challenge. So as we're talking this evening, please understand that I'm talking as an educator, but I've also been there as a parent. And I understand the challenges that we face as parents. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get started talking about who are these kids and how do we best support them in terms of what they need. All right. Oh, that's not what I want. That's what I want. There we go. All right, hopefully you can see my screen. We're going to be kind of walking through the process of understanding who high ability learners are and what are the things that they really need from a learning environment and how do we support that? How do we make sure that we're providing what they need, that we're getting rid of the barriers that oftentimes get in their way and prevent them from reaching their highest potential? So first off, when we start talking about a high ability student, you need to know that there are many, many definitions, but typically the person that we're referring to is that learner that performs at or shows the potential for performing at an outstanding level in one or more domains. We're looking at students that excel or have the potential to excel. And it's really important that we distinguish both of those because we recognize that we do have high ability learners that for one reason or another have not had the opportunity to necessarily get the acceleration and the enrichment that they need, and therefore we're not necessarily seeing them excel. So when we talk high ability, well, these are children, these are adults who see and make relationships that other individuals don't make. They make connections between ideas and concepts, and they're just different thinking strategies. These are learners who acquire and retain information at an amazing pace. I laugh and tell teachers, if you can stay a day ahead of them, you're doing well. They have the ability oftentimes to learn content that we would think would be not necessarily appropriate for them, and yet they're intrigued by it. They want to know more about it. These are kids who process information differently. And that's one of the big distinctions that we see in these learners. A high ability learner is a learner who's actually processing information differently. Well, if that's the case, then I need to make sure that the instruction that I'm providing also addresses the way they are acquiring information. So if we look at that traditional bell curve, we're talking about the learners at the far end of that bell curve. Now, oftentimes we look at learners on the other end of the bell curve, and I have parents who have students who perhaps have a 70 IQ. No one in education would argue, no one would ever argue that these learners need a specific learning environment. Their environment needs to be changed. But somehow when we get to the other end and we're looking at that learner with a high ability, people start to question, well, they'll just be fine. They don't need anything different. Well, research tells us that that's not true. These learners do need and deserve an environment which pushes them, which challenges them, which allows them to think and process in the way that comes naturally to them. So let's talk just for a minute about the difference between that bright student and that high ability student, because there are differences between them. Your bright learner knows the answer. School is their wheelhouse. Your high ability learner is the one who's constantly asking questions. They cannot get enough information. They are highly curious. Many times I hear people say, oh, well, their ideas are just out there. They're so wild and crazy. Not necessarily. It's just that they've taken a pathway that perhaps you didn't see or have made a connection that you didn't recognize. For a teacher, these kids can sometimes be frustrating because they seem to goof around, and yet they know that information. In the classroom, they may be reading a book while the teacher's talking. And when the teacher calls on them, they instantly know the information. They can discuss in detail. They are not at the top of the group, they're actually beyond the group. They love abstraction and complexity. They thrive on it. And the more complex you can make a task, the more excited they are. Now, notice I said the more complex you can make a task, not the harder you make the task, because tasks that are simply difficult actually tire our brains. Tasks that are complex ignite our brain. They get us excited. Well, that's what I want to do for a high ability learner. I want to ignite their brain. I want to get them going. Now, these are learners that oftentimes need 0 to 1 to 2 repetitions of material to earn mastery. Oh, this is a big one because in a typical classroom, the typical learner needs anywhere from 12 to 15 touches on content in a variety of different ways to achieve mastery. Now, I want you to think for a minute. You're that high ability learner. You're sitting in that classroom. The teacher's on touch number 8. She's got at least 4, maybe more, times that they're going to go back through that content. As that high ability student, what are you doing? If you were in my classroom, one of the things that I found those students were doing were sometimes causing problems because they're done. They're tired of hearing that information. They've got it. They need to move on, which is why we have to structure our classrooms to allow them the opportunity to continue, to allow them the opportunity to extend. And we teach strategies to teachers to allow that to happen so that I don't ever have a child waiting to learn. And that's what happens with high ability learners when we don't have in place a structure that meets their learning needs. These are kids who do a great job making connections and drawing inferences. Notice on this list that it says they initiate projects. As you look down that list, do you see anywhere where it says they complete projects? No. And that's the hard part sometimes with high ability learners. Oftentimes they initiate a project because they have something they want to know. They've been given something by their teacher, they've seen something and they're really interested, and they work on the project, they work on the task until they get the answer that they were looking for. Now that means that as far as they're concerned, they're done. So it is not unusual for these learners to have lots of projects going on at the same time, and they don't ever seem to completely finish, at least finish in terms of what the teacher is looking for. And so that's something that we have to work with them on. I have parents who tell me, oh, Karen, my kid has 4 books going at the same time and they've got these 2 projects. And yes, I know, that's a high ability learner. They can be very intense, and that intensity can cause some challenges for them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Notice at the bottom here, it says they enjoy learning. And yet, where the bright learner, on theirs, it says they enjoy school. This really worried me. And Johns Hopkins did a study, as did Stanford University, looking at gifted learners and asking them a series of questions about their experiences. And they talked to hundreds of high ability learners. And one of the questions they asked the younger learners was, do you like school? They got answers like, I like my teacher. I didn't ask you that. Do you like school? I like spending time with my friends, but I didn't ask you that. Do you like school? And sadly, many of them said, it's okay. It's okay. That's not good enough for me. I don't want school to be okay for these learners. I want it to be a place that they enjoy, a place that they want to be. The problem is that for many high ability learners, if we don't have programming in place, if we don't have an opportunity for them to be grouped together, if we don't have teachers who are trained to support them, they don't have that opportunity to learn something new every day, which is what a learner needs. I need that opportunity to be challenged on a daily basis. So, 2 different groups of kids, we need to provide for both of them. But our Tier 1 instruction oftentimes provides for that bright learner. It many times doesn't have what that high ability learner needs, which is why we need to be able to look at different ways to support their learning. So, some things to know about high ability learners. 1, they don't always excel in school. Remember that high ability can also be, I have the potential for that, but I may not be reaching that potential if things aren't put in place to support me. They can, and they do, have learning disabilities. Doesn't mean that I can't have a reading disability or a language disability. Doesn't mean that I can't be ADHD. Those can go hand in hand. They can experience what we call overexcitabilities, which sometimes things seem very loud to them. Lights seem very bright to them. Those are overexcitabilities that we have to support them in moving forward with. They can struggle to find like-minded friends. They need kids who think like they think, which is why at school it is very important that we provide learning environments where they can be grouped together. Oftentimes when asked, they will share that they don't feel like they fit in. They don't feel like I belong. And here's a big one. A high ability learner is high ability 24/7. not just when they're at school, not just when they're at home, not just on Tuesdays at 2:30, not just at 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. They are high ability all the time. And that's why we need to make sure that our programming addresses and meets those needs. Well, as you look at this list, we realize that being a high ability student is not always a net positive situation. They have challenges that they face that many other learners don't face. And those are some of the things that I want to make sure that you're aware of this evening. These are amazing kids, and I love working with them. But we do need to remember that sometimes they face challenges that we may not think about. These kids learn differently. They oftentimes do not need to go through the same sequential steps that other learners do. So that high ability learner may look at you and you say, okay, tell me the 5 steps to getting this activity done, or the 4 steps that are needed. And the learner looks at you like, what do you mean, Mom? Because in their head, there's only 2 steps because they merged some of the steps together. So remember, they don't see content in the same way. They don't necessarily follow the same sequence in learning that content, and that's okay as long as they get to that end point. So what do they need? Well, one, they need things that are different, not more. It's really hard to feel like you're being punished for being a high ability student. And I'm going to give you an example of that. When my youngest was in kindergarten, he'd been in kindergarten 2 weeks. And he came home from kindergarten and he informed me, Mommy, my teacher needs me to slow down. So I said to him, all right, are you doing your best? Mommy, I'm getting all stars. Are you making sure your name's on your paper? Are you following direct? Mommy, I'm getting all stars. She just needs me to slow down. Well, I continued to question him, could not figure out what the issue was. So finally I said, you know what? Tomorrow on our way to school, I'm going to stop off and I'm going to ask your teacher, what specifically is it that she needs you to do? Because I want to be able to support you. I want to be able to help you. I got a real quick answer from him and he said, Mommy, that's not necessary. Oh, it just became very necessary. Now I really need to know what's going on. So after a little more questioning, I said to him, Eric, did your teacher say the words, Eric, slow down? After spending time looking at his shoes, he informed me, not exactly. No. I said, well, honey, why do you think you need to slow down? And then I found out, Mom, so you see, when you finish the first packet, you get another packet. And I don't want to do another packet. So I'll just slow down. Now, he entered school reading. I didn't teach him to read. I don't know where he learned to read. He just did. He knew his math facts. I don't know. He had older siblings. Maybe he just listened. I don't know. But he needed something different. He didn't need more. We don't want to punish our high ability learners for being high ability. And when they simply get more work, then it becomes punishment. We're not trying to punish them. They need challenge. They need that increased complexity. They need dialogue and discourse with each other. They need the opportunity to share ideas and to go and have conversations about them. They need choice. They need those like-minded peers. And very importantly, they need the opportunity to fail in a safe learning environment. You see, one of the things that happens with high ability learners is sometimes in the early years, school is very easy and they don't fail often. In fact, they may know the answer and they don't even know how they knew the answer. They just know it. When that happens, and then suddenly they're placed in a challenging environment and they don't know the answer, that can be a panic time. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But failure is a part of learning. We have to learn how to be unsuccessful or we'll never learn how to be successful. So our high ability learners need all of these things, not one of them, not 2 of them. They need all of them. So why should we cluster group? I understand that your district is moving into cluster grouping. My district has been cluster grouping for a number of years, and I work across the country supporting schools with the cluster grouping model. And one of the things that I love about cluster grouping is that it acknowledges that this learner is high ability all day long. Not just on Tuesday or Thursday, they are high ability all day long. And I want that to be acknowledged. I want people to recognize that this is something that is with them all the time. There's a question in the chat, what are the demographics of my district? And I will be happy to share that. Oops, I want to go back one more thing here. So my particular district has a very wide range demographically. I have a very wealthy area, and then I have a very poor area. I have a number of students from title populations, so they're in title schools. I have a large Native American population. I have a large Hispanic population. I have a large population that comes to school not necessarily speaking English. But then on the other end, I also have upper middle class and some of what you would consider very wealthy families. So I have a big range in my district of learners that I have to be able to address. So when we fail to cluster group and we only look at these learners and only support them on a 1 day a week or a portion of the day, we forget that, well, what about the rest of the day? When we cluster group, it lets us support them socially, emotionally, and academically all day long. It also puts them in that group of like-minded peers. And that's important. These children need each other. They need somebody they can talk to, somebody who's interested in the kind of things that they're interested in. What it also allows us is to be able to focus the instruction. I can better meet the needs of students when we've cluster grouped because we've lowered the range of learners in my class and I have a group of learners that I'm working with. That lets me target instruction, and that's what my learners need. They don't need to sit and listen to instruction that is too advanced for them, but they also don't need to listen to instruction that isn't advanced enough for them. It allows schools to provide that full-time service for high ability kids with not a lot of extra cost. And what we do see is achievement levels increase, not just for our high ability kids, but across the board, because we're able to target instruction not only in our cluster classrooms, but in all of our classrooms. And that becomes very important. So, wake up my screen here, maybe. Whoop. There we go. Okay. So, we're going to take just a couple minutes and walk in the shoes of a highly able learner. Perfectionism is one of the things that can really get in their way and can really block them from being successful. And we're going to talk about some strategies that as parents you can use with them. We're going to talk about intensity. Nothing rolls off the back of these kids. They can be bothered by things that we think, really? That's got you upset? They can be anxious. And we see high levels of anxiety in these children. They are creative thinkers. Oh my goodness. Their out of the box thinking excites me, but sometimes it overwhelms me because there are times when I will say to them, guys, I love your out of the box thinking. I love your creativity, but I'm in the box. Can you get me to where you are? Because you've moved way beyond where I am. We've already talked a little bit about that learning pace. They move at a breakneck pace and they want their instruction to keep pace with them. We also have what many people refer to as undermotivated high ability kids. I don't know that they're necessarily undermotivated as much as they're just not motivated by what we want to teach them. And that becomes the goal of making those connections for them, being able to see how do I hook this learner into what I need them to learn, but also tie it to something that is of interest to them. And then we do have twice exceptional learners, that learner that has some type of a disability as well as high ability, which can cause a real challenge for those learners. So let's talk about perfectionism. Now, I'm talking about a perfectionism that can actually disable a learner, can actually shut them right down, because they would rather not attempt a task than be wrong, because being wrong is such a terrible place for them to be. When we get a learner whose perfectionism has gotten out of control, in my district, we refer to it as perfectionism on steroids. They are so perfectionistic that they are unable to move forward. With the little ones, I talk about learning butterflies. And we talk about that feeling in your tummy where, oh, it's all fluttery and you're not sure whether you're going to be able to even, you might even be sick. It's so scary. Learning butterflies are important. And when I can put a name on that for a learner, somehow it isn't quite as frightening. Learning butterflies come when, as a learner, the teacher asks a question, we're attempting a task, and I don't know for sure how to do it. I don't know the right answer. For many high ability kids, that's frightening because they've always known the answer. They're always the kid with their hand up. They're always, when you're not anymore, because you're in a challenging environment, because your teacher has figured out how to make that connection with you, it can be scary. I had done a learning butterfly lesson with a group of second graders, and I happened to come back to the school about 3 weeks later, and I was walking down the hall, and a little girl in a line was passing me, and she reached out and she grabbed my arm and she looked at me and she held up 4 fingers and she said, 4 times. Now I have to admit, I looked at her and thought, I have no idea what she's talking about. But I smiled at her and went, oh, that's awesome, that's great. And I continued on my way. Now I happened to spiral back through her classroom because I needed to drop something off for her teacher. And as I walked past her desk, she reached out to grab me again. And I leaned down and she said, Mrs. Brown, 4 times today, I have had learning butterflies. I'm like, oh, I am so excited for you. Do you know how much learning is happening for you? That is awesome. When we can teach children to not be fearful of that feeling, they can feel it and be accommodated by it. With older kids, we don't talk about learning butterflies because they don't want to hear that. We talk about the word disequilibrium. And they love the word disequilibrium because it's big and it sounds important. But disequilibrium is simply that. It is a state of learning. It is that state of being in between. I talk with these learners about working in draft. When you work in draft, you always have the ability to make change. And that's comforting to a high ability learner who's not comfortable being wrong. So I've had students who've gone to office supply stores and gotten themselves little stamps that they can stamp on their paper. Mrs. Brown, remember, this is draft. I said, I remember, this is draft. But I need to get them to be able to move forward. I need to get them to be able to move on. Because if they can't, they're not going to learn what they need to learn. This is one of my favorite cartoons because it says you're doing your homework and, well, I wasn't sure that I understood the chapter, so I reviewed my notes from the last chapter and now I'm rereading it. You do all that work? Well, now I understand it. I used to think you were smart. Helping learners understand that learning isn't effortless and that we have to put in the energy to be able to do that. It's called productive struggle, and productive struggle is how we learn. If we are not in productive struggle, we're not learning. As gifted learners, they're not real keen on productive struggle. They have to get used to that. And it's something that becomes very important. So when you hear your learner struggling, our natural tendency as parents is to want to rescue, to help them. Sometimes the struggle is important, and letting them struggle and letting them try again and again to figure it out. I've had learners come up to me and, Mrs. Brown, I've tried 4 times and I cannot figure this out. I said, okay, so 4 different times you have been incorrect. What have you learned each time? What do you mean? I said, well, the first time that it wasn't correct, you learned something because you did something different. What did you learn the first time? Well, I learned that, all right. And what did you learn the second time? Helping students understand that productive struggle is about failing forward. Each time you struggle, you learn something. All right, we want to be able to do that. Praise the process, not the product. It's not what, but how that matters. We need to focus on a learner's efforts. I need you to try for me. I need you to put in that effort to show me what you can do. That's what I need you to do for me. When we focus on process, we really help our learners. I was doing a presentation for a group of parents in Arizona, and I was talking about the importance of productive struggle and the importance of praising the process, not just the product. And I used an example of a student who had gotten an 18 out of 20 on a vocabulary test. And they took it home. The teacher had high-fived them, told them she was so proud of them, the effort that they had put in. And when they got home, Mom made the comment, "Oh, sweetheart, what happened? We studied those 2 words." Suddenly, the 18 that they'd gotten correct didn't matter anymore. The praise was to the product, not the process. And a mother in the audience later shared with me, she said, "I sat there and I thought, what kind of a parent would say something like that? That's terrible." Well, in talking with her several weeks later, she said, "I need to let you know something that happened." She said, "My 4th grade daughter came home and she had an assignment that she'd worked on really hard at school. And she had gotten a good score on it. She said it wasn't perfect, but she'd done very well. And I knew how hard she'd worked. And I was excited for her. And I said, you know what? We should put this on the refrigerator because your dad's out of town right now. And I know he's going to want to see this when he gets back." She said, "My daughter snatched it out of my hands, crumpled it up, and threw it in the garbage." And she looked at me and she said, "Mommy, perfect papers go on the refrigerator. This is not a perfect paper." And Mom looked at me and she said, "I realized I taught her that. I didn't mean to, but I did because I focused on the product instead of the process." It's really easy to do. It's really easy to look at that score, to look at that grade, instead of looking at the process that it took the learner to get there. What is it that you were proud of? I am proud of the word choice that you used. Oh my goodness, look how you showed all of your work on your math assignment. That is amazing. When we're looking at science and social studies, I love the way you explained your answer. Focus on that process, not the product. So I am a huge proponent of growth mindset because, especially for our gifted learners, especially for our high ability kids, it is so important for them to harness the power of yet. That's a little tiny word, but oh my goodness, does it have strength. It has amazing power. When we focus on yet, we give that indicator that we believe that you are going to get there. You're just not there yet. So what do you not know how to do well yet? What do you not know how to do at all yet? I encourage families, I encourage teachers, build a yet board in your room. Everybody in the family, if you're doing it at home, needs to have something up on the yet board, something that they're working toward, something that they don't do well yet, but they're working on it. It may surprise you to know that your children believe you can do everything and that it comes easy to you. Helping your children understand that no, there are things that mom and dad, that grandma and grandpa, that aunts and uncles don't do well yet, but we're working on them. And that's part of learning. And that's what we want our gifted and our high ability kids to understand. I want them to understand the power of yet. So what is it? I want you to think for just a minute. What is something that maybe you don't do well yet? Maybe you'd like to, something that you'd like to learn to do. So how do I move myself forward with that? How do I take that next step in moving forward? We talked a little bit about anxiety, and I shared that gifted learners oftentimes, high ability learners oftentimes really struggle with anxiety. Some of this comes from their perfectionism. Some of it just seems to be born into them. Recognizing ways for them to calm that inner voice that's telling them that they're not doing what they need to be doing, that they're not achieving to the level that they've set for themselves is very important. And that's when the growth mindset really can be of benefit for you. When we think about these learners and their development, one of the things that we need to remember is that high ability kids can be very asynchronous in their development. Basically, what that means is that developmentally, I'm maybe right here, and when you listen to me intellectually, I may be way beyond that. I had a mom who said, you know, if I only knew whether I was talking to the 15-year-old intellectual son of mine or the 7-year-old, it would make it so much easier. I said, yeah, well, it'd be really easy if it told you on their head who you were talking to. I said, but it doesn't. We don't ever want to take childhood away from a child. And I don't want learners to feel that they have to develop any faster than they're ready for, because you know what? They can't. 7-year-olds are 7, and they have developmental milestones that they need to walk through. And that's wonderful. And we need to be sure that our programming is developmentally appropriate as well as intellectually appropriate. That's a challenge, because we oftentimes see this huge asynchrony between these learners, between where they are developmentally and where they are from an intellectual academic standpoint. One of the biggest areas that I know parents struggle with is reading, because oftentimes we have very young readers who can read at a very high level. I'll be honest with you. Yes, I have 3rd grade students who can read high school text. I don't want them reading high school text. It's not appropriate. So that means that as teachers, we have to be able to find resources and materials that are developmentally appropriate, but still complex enough that we can offer the challenge that students need. And there are materials out there. There are things that are available that districts utilize to make sure that we are providing for that asynchrony. We don't want to pretend that that doesn't exist. So as a learner, we have to remember that I'm good enough. I'm good enough just as I am. I'm a high ability kid, but I don't need to do any more than that. I still have developmental milestones that I have to walk through, that I have to take step by step by step. My high ability comes 24/7. It's always with me, always with me. That asynchrony is part of who I am. When we think about these intensities that these kids sometimes come with, it may be simply that the tag in the back of their shirt drives them crazy and they need it taken out. It can be that they need and want a particular kind of pencil to work with. It can be that noise bothers them. One of the things that we can do when we put these learners together in cluster classrooms is allow them the opportunity to work through these things together in a safe learning environment. You'll notice the word fatigue on this page. And oftentimes I hear parents question me about that. What do you mean by fatigue? Well, that little high ability brain runs 24/7. 24/7. Yes. And they get tired. When your high ability learner hops in your car and they're quiet, give them a little space. Give them a little time, because in many cases they're decompressing. They're just calming themselves down. Now, sometimes high ability kids jump in that car and it's a constant chatter. Awesome. But remember that when they enter your car and they're quiet, it may just be that they need some time. Don't bombard them with questions. Give them time to decompress. fatigue is real with high ability kids. They get tired. That brain does not stop. They are immensely curious about everything. And oftentimes their questions are exhausting. And there are times when we have the tendency to want to just say, stop, no more questions. But understand, this is how they're exploring their world. This is how they're making the connections that they need to make. So give them that time. Have that conversation with them, because that's important for them. That's very important for them. So I want to make sure that I leave time at the end for questions, because I know that families oftentimes have questions that they want to have answered. So I have one more thing I want to share with you, and then we can go back through and talk about anything that I've talked about, or maybe you just have questions that you would like to have answered, and I will do my best to try to answer them. But one thing that I do want you to understand, if they say it's easy, it's because they've never done it. Parenting a high ability child is like living in a theme park full of thrill rides. Sometimes you smile, sometimes you gasp, sometimes you scream, sometimes you laugh, sometimes you gaze in wonder and astonishment, and sometimes you are frozen in your seat. Sometimes you're proud, and sometimes the ride is so nerve-wracking that you can't do anything but cry. But know that it's a ride that you don't want to miss. They are amazing learners. They are exciting students and fun to do things with. I'm going to stop sharing and ask if anyone has a question that they would like me to answer. If there's anything that I didn't cover that you'd like us to discuss, I always want to make sure that we leave that last 10, 15 minutes for questions. Any questions that anyone has? Was there anything in the chat that I did not address?
Karen, there were a couple of questions within the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
And some I have answered as far as district perspective, but you can certainly offer your expertise. So how do you cluster group in a regular classroom, and can you provide an example? And I do want to let all of our families know that we've had a webinar that has focused on clustering methods, particularly with Dr. Dana Bruez, who has co-authored a book with Karen Brown. And that webinar is actually on our website, so you can hear specifically about clustering. But from your expertise and opinion, Karen, how do you cluster in a regular classroom, and can you provide an example?
So I'd be happy to. When we think about clustering in a regular classroom, in any classroom, flexible grouping is a key component, because if I'm going to teach a lesson to the whole class, we know for a fact that that means I'm missing many of my learners. I'm teaching to the middle. I can't teach to the middle, because when I do that, that means that I have some children that the lesson is above, and for some children, the lesson is too low. So we flexibly group them. And I'm going to give you an example. I was in a second grade classroom, and they were doing a unit on habitat, and they had targeted specifically polar animals, and they were talking about, and they had been talking about all different kinds of polar animals that they were researching and learning about, and they had looked at books, and they had watched movies, they did all kinds of things to learn about the different kinds of habitat that are found in polar regions for different animals. The teacher decided that she was going to use the continuum of complexity, and she was going to alter the complexity of the task that she gave to her learners. So one of the things that she did was she had a chart that had a list of 5 polar animals, and across the top had different components of habitat. She had one group of learners that their job was to fill in that chart. Very tight parameters for that group, because that's where they were and that's what they needed. Now she had another group of learners that she handed the same chart to. All the pieces of habitat were across the top, but there were no polar animals listed. And she asked the learners to decide, what polar animals do you want to talk about? You need to choose 4 to 5 different polar animals and complete the chart. She changed the complexity of the task. She had another group of learners that she handed a blank piece of paper to. And she said, we've been studying about habitat. We've been studying about specific types of animals. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to choose 4 polar animals, and I want you to come up with a way to organize the information about their habitat. You can do it any way you want. Now, she had 8 learners in that little group. 2 of them made a chart. Several of them did a T-table where they had the animal and then they listed different pieces of habitat. One of them made the most amazing Venn diagram that I'd ever seen a young child make. She changed the complexity of the task. Are they all learning about polar animals? Yes, they are. So they're all able to engage in the conversation and they're all able to grow and learn. But by changing the complexity of the task, she's ensuring that she's engaging each one of her learners. Now in mathematics, the easiest one that I use a lot is most difficult first. And most difficult first says that you're going to listen to me teach for about 3 to 5 minutes. And then I'm going to give you the option of, here are the 5 most difficult problems. Try them. If you can get 4 out of 5 correct, you don't need to do the homework assignment. You've got it. You can move on and buy time on your extension menu. Now, your extension menu might be related to math, might be related to a project that we're working on in math. It might be related to something in another subject area, but you're buying time by showing me that you have this understanding. There are so many different ways that we can differentiate in a classroom. We can change the pace of what happens in a classroom, and I refer to that as pacing out. So if I have, as teachers, we recognize that look on a child's face when they've had it. Please don't talk about this anymore, Mrs. Brown. I get it. I don't want to go any further with this. Okay. In my classrooms, what the kids do is they put their thumb under their chin. And when a child does this, what they're asking is, can I pace out? I've heard the examples. I know what to do. Can I get started? As a teacher, it's my job to nod yes or no. If I nod yes, that means absolutely, you may go ahead and get started. But if I nod no, that means you need to hang with me for a couple more minutes, because that means I know that I have something else that you don't know that I'm about to share. Now, a couple rules for pacing out. If you pace out and you go and you get started on the assignment, or you go and you get started on a task and you realize, uh-oh, I don't know this as well as I thought I did. That's okay, because you're always willing to rejoin the group. But if you choose not to rejoin the group, you don't get a private lesson. No, when you come back and tell me that you need support, I'm going to team you up with a partner and we're going to provide that support for you. But I want you to understand that that doesn't mean that your teacher's going to sit there and go through it with you individually. You chose to pace out. Typically that happens one time, and then learners learn to come back into the learning environment if they need to. There are hundreds of ways. I, in particular, like to use the continuum of complexity and tiered lessons. Those are 2 of my favorites, using depth of knowledge to alter the complexity of the tasks that we're doing. But flexible grouping is essential if I'm going to target instruction. I hope I answered that question.
Karen, there's also a question about the pitfalls of perhaps waiting so long in the learning and school process before meeting the needs of students who aren't necessarily identified in the early childhood years. Currently within our structure, we have a program that starts at 3rd grade. I have shared within the Q&A that high ability identification will start as early as kindergarten per our Department of Education this year. However, can you speak to the ways in which educators can generally support students in early childhood, and just the pitfalls as far as the identification process when it doesn't happen during those early years?
So one, identifying high ability learners very young can be challenging, because we do have that developmental piece that has to align. Oftentimes I have parents say, well, my child is reading. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're a high ability learner. It means that they were an early reader. So we walk that fine line of making sure that we are providing appropriate challenge without providing too much challenge. Now, the wonderful thing, in my opinion, is the fact that there's no such thing as a gifted strategy. There's no such thing as a high ability strategy. It's just best practice. Every classroom teacher can flexibly group. Every classroom teacher can offer differentiation based on those continuums, based on complexity. So it can happen in every classroom and should happen in every classroom. And the hope is that we train all teachers to be able to do this. We recognize that when we have young learners, particularly in preschool, in kindergarten, in first grade, we also have to struggle with the idea of that level of independence. There are certain things that they just can't do independently. They need that group, they need that teacher, they need those pieces. But whenever we can put in place things that allow them to extend themselves. So many times in a kindergarten or in a first grade classroom, the room runs on a center process. So in reading, there may be reading centers that the children do while the teacher is holding a reading group, the children are at different centers. Those centers can be differentiated to meet the needs of learners and allow those kids to move forward. The reading groups themselves can be differentiated. So high ability kids have that opportunity to do and to read content that is higher than what you would normally find. The foundations for learning are important. And while we identify in preschool, in first grade, in second grade, in third grade, it is important to remember that foundationally, we need to make sure that all those skills are in place. But when we find a learner who needs more challenge, who needs more, we need to make sure that what we're providing them isn't simply another worksheet or another book, but that we've made an adjustment. I have a marvelous kindergarten teacher who has what she calls leaper logs. And she has children in her classroom who already know their letters. So they're in kindergarten, they already know their letters, they are reading. And she said, they don't need their letters, they don't need their letter sounds. She said, but I have a big group of my kindergartners who do. So her high ability kids, she has gone ahead and put them in leaper logs. And they are finding words that start with particular letters. She has all kinds of things that they search for words in. They are using the skills that she's teaching in the room through their leaper logs. So lots of different things.
Karen, there's also a question in the chat that asks, how do you manage having a high ability child while that child may have siblings who are not identified? So from your parent hat as well as your expertise, can you talk to us about that?
Yes, that can be a challenge. And one of the things that I learned early on is that every child is different. My high ability kids are very different from each other, as are my high achievers. They're all different. And I talk a lot with my own kids, talked a lot with them about, you know what, we're all going to get to the finish line, but we're all going to take a different path. And the path I take is really dependent upon me. So we'll all get there and we'll all finish, but we're all going to finish following a different trail. I gave each of my kids, we did an activity one time in my classroom, and I gave each of my kids a different length of yarn. And I said, okay, I want you to put your yarn here on the board, and I want you to, it has to touch the board the whole time, and then get it up into this corner. And I made sure that one piece of yarn was short enough that it was a direct path to that corner. But others of them were so long that the kids had to wind them around and up and to connect them to get there. I said, so did everybody's yarn get from point A to point B? Yes. So you all got there, right? Mm-hmm. So did anybody miss out? Well, no, we all got there. You all got there at different ways and at different times, and that's okay. We talk about, when we talk about finding a just right book, We talk about the 5 different things that are part of finding a book that's just right for you. I said, well, you know what? That goes for classrooms too. We need just right classrooms. We need just right books. We need just right learning. And everybody's path is a little bit different. High ability kids are not any smarter than any other child. They process information differently. Their brain is working differently. So I really try to instill in kids and in families, don't talk about how smart a learner is, because it doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with how their brain is processing information. Their brain is working very efficiently, and that's important to know, but doesn't make them any better than any other learner. In fact, as my children got older, my daughter was quick to recognize that the world was a bigger struggle for her older brother than it was for her. And she said, Mom, I don't understand. He's really intelligent, and yet the world is not a happy place for him. I said, sometimes it's not.
Thank you. Another question that came up within the Q&A ask, what is the most beneficial strategy for addressing situations when my child is being his high ability self and I need a bit of a break? When I was a kid, my mother used to tell me her ears were tired. I feel that's not the best way.
So I have found that honesty is the best policy. And there are times when I tell parents, kids understand things like downtime. And so I will tell them, Mom needs downtime. Just like you need downtime sometimes. You need to just, Mom, I just want to go play with my Legos, or I just want to go read my book, or I just want to go, right, you just want to go ride your bike, or I don't want to have to think, Mom, I just want to ride my bike. I tell them, well, you know what? Sometimes moms need that too. Moms need downtime too. Can you give me 20 minutes of downtime, please? When we address the fact that we are human and we need a break, just like they need a break sometimes, I find that they are real quick to understand that, oh, okay. Now, I will tell you, do not be surprised if they walk up to you with a timer, and if you've said 20 minutes, that's all you're getting, because they're going to set that timer for 20 minutes. So if you need more than 20 minutes, you need to be specific and say, I need 30 minutes, or I need 10 minutes, or but understand that they're going to hold you to that particular time. But there's nothing wrong with saying, I need some downtime. It doesn't have anything to do with how much I love you. It just has to do with, I need downtime just like you do. My brain needs a rest.
Excellent. And we do have one more question, only a couple minutes remaining. And the question asks, how do we work with our children that may be holding back to match peers?
Yeah. Peer pressure is intense. And particularly with high ability kids who want to fit in, they want to be part of the group. One thing that I love about cluster grouping is it gives them a group to be part of. It gives them that opportunity to be with kids who push themselves, who like that type of challenge. But they are going to have peers that aren't able to work at that same level. That brings that conversation of you learn your way and they learn their way. You can't learn their way just like they can't learn your way. And that's all right. But that doesn't mean you should try to be them. It's okay to be yourself. And just reinforce with them that it's a difference in how their brain is working, and it's okay. One brain isn't better than the other. They're just working differently. We talk about the fact that there are a lot of cars on the road, and they are all different. Yeah, there are a lot of brains in your classroom, and they're all different, and they're all working differently. Don't try to be driving a different brain. Just drive your own brain.
Excellent way to conclude. this evening. Thank you so much, Karen. We are appreciative of just your presence, your expertise, your grace. I appreciate the educator hat, the parent hat that you bring to this, and we really enjoyed having you be a part of this dialogue surrounding high ability. We will, again, as mentioned earlier, upload this session so all parents have access to it. Make sure that you are following us, hashtag WT for equity, to track all the things that we are doing to advance equitable achievement throughout our district. We are so thankful to have you all with us, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.